Hi, my name is Tim Carter, and this is IamCorne.org, the apologetic and outreach ministry of Landmark Missionary Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Arkansas. The results of, let's say a small, well-controlled experiment are in, and I just want to share them with our church, Landmark that is. Originally, Landmark Missionary Baptist Church in 1949 was organized by Dr. L.D. Foreman. He's president of the Missionary Baptist Seminary for approximately 22 years. He had written a book, Bible in 8 Ages, which you can still buy that through Bogart Press, or that is Landmark Missionary Baptist Church was still buying those books as late as 2005, 2006 maybe. So anyway, they're really nice books. But the young or old dichotomy, that false dichotomy, encroached upon our church, which was fine. But the experiment that I enjoyed was in a classroom format, in a lecture format that is. I was able to recount to the class about an occasion in which a scientist or a medical professional in the field of science, I suppose, was being asked about how would he have determined the age of Adam when Adam was first created, since Adam was just hours old, that is, had only existed for so many hours. So I noticed that the class was aware that Adam had been created in just a matter of hours, literally hours, probably as few as 12 hours, daylight that is. And that they were intrigued when I began to share with them the medical professional's assessment of the physiological examination he could have given Adam to determine Adam's age. And he talked about blood work. He talked about how they send that to the lab, and he began to talk about the things that you can find in the blood. And at a certain age, a person, the blood work would be expected to show this reading and that reading. And we all know, just as commoners, certain degrees and levels of cholesterol or degrees of whatever would be in a man. And like my hemoglobins were reported recently at like 16, which I guess was good, they told me. So, but anyway, the class had no problem with the idea of Adam. And in the original discussion that I had viewed and had reviewed so that I could share with our class, the audience was seemingly oblivious to how interesting they were, apparently intrigued, and all assuming, yeah, that'd be good to know. How would we find out how old Adam actually was? What was his age? But none of them were questioning how long he had existed. So I couldn't help but capture that. And it's part of what I'm doing for even a dissertation. And what it is that then when it came to the discussion of the age of the earth, people were picking 6,000, that is approximately 6,000 years. Some were really happy with that. Others were really sad with that, sad face. And then there's 4.5 billion years. And this was years, 4.5 billion years. And some people were happy with that, and others were sad with that. But I noticed in the same educational environment, with all things being equal, we all have personal computers. We all know that Google is now a verb, that we consider go Google something, and we equate the search engine Google with our activity. So go Google it. So we could all Google it. But now the same people, same congregants, members of the same congregation where I pastor and have been pastoring now for over 18 years, senior pastor, and over 5 years prior to that as the Minister of Education Outreach, and then teaching classes for years before that. So, same bat channel, same bat time, same bat place. And the same group couldn't transfer the idea of Adam and just hours having been existed just hours prior, and then their curiosity for, wonder how old he was. One man recently told me that he was taught as a child that Adam was 33 and a half years old because that was the age of Jesus, and when Jesus died, he died at the prime age of 33 and a half, and that we're all in heaven, that is here on the earth, living in the kingdom of God for the 1,000-year reign, for example. We'll all be in that perfect age and perfect development. And again, even that was so obvious that for years now, generations have constructed an age of Adam that had nothing to do with how long he existed. So I was fascinated and intrigued by this, is why would people then be arguing about the age of the earth as one is young and one is old, and it not occur to us, that is, not as readily occur to us, that, well, what if this were how long it's existed and this were how old it was? Because what would we do, let's say as commoners, as Christians, what would we do to measure the age of the earth? Since none of us would know what to do to measure the age of Adam, that is, if someone could just bring in the cadaver of Adam and bring it into our building here, for example, in some absurd hypothetical illustration, and someone say, oh, this is Adam, and he's unconscious, and he was created just 12 hours ago, and we have him here. You guys in the church come over and take a look at him. Well, our medical professionals could begin to do lab works and work up labs on him, and they could begin to do a physical, I suppose, and do vitals and whatever. Now, they would have the ability using a field of science, but let's say we didn't have these medical professionals here, and I didn't have this brilliant doctor we now have here. What would we do? Well, we'd just stand around and say, well, he doesn't have gray hair, he doesn't seem to be very wrinkled, he looks like a 30-year-old man. Someone said, no, I think he's 21. Well, okay, but we would all know that he's only hours old as far as time of existence. But it was interesting. Then I was curious, well, why are we warring with words when it comes to the earth? So I went back to seminary, so to speak. Literally went back to seminary, a throwback. I went back to one of their longest tenured professors there, the hermeneutics professor. And of course he was dealing with, it's called the gap theory, which is not what I was studying. And that was his research, and that's something that when I was in the seminary there were teachers who were for the gap theory and teachers who were not so much for it. And I was privileged to write a paper for a teacher who was not always seeing the gap theory as that which is self-evident, and another teacher who, for him, it was a fact that was the gap theory, and then another teacher that was somewhat more balanced in wanting a systematic approach to it. So I knew where to go, so I went to Dr. John Penn, and he was talking about the day in 1,000 years. Well, I was fascinated because that really answered the question. It demonstrated that there is a ratio between, let's say, the hours of Adam's existence and how old he might have been, and someone could calculate that. Now, I wasn't working on that at the time. I was just intrigued about what would happen if one were actually the age of the earth and the other was how long it existed. So I went this direction, as he told me that if you had all the numbers, you could work this out. And I was like, oh, great. So he was right, so I took all the numbers. And this took me, instead of the approximation, I went to the 6,250. And then, knowing that that was only half time, meaning daytime, I went ahead and included a 24-hour day, which made this 12,500 years times the 360 lunar days, and that of course equaled the 4.5 million days, which when multiplied by 1,000 years equaled this. So this became the time of existence. That is, the earth would not have had to come into existence any longer ago than approximately 6,000 years, which when converted to 24-hour days, because man did not work 6 24-hour days and the rest on the seventh. If man had worked 6 24-hour days, he would be dead by the seventh day. So to take the Bible literally and read it at face value, which is what I'm happy to do, it appears that you could walk into a classroom, and what was great about here at Landmark Baptist Church is they were already taught the gap theory from the Missionary Baptist Seminary through the Bible Late Ages, and he was here and organized our church, and we had people study that, teach that, classes on it, and then we had another class where someone was teaching. This was just years ago, not that many, but he was teaching and he was touting young earth, young earth. But it's interesting, I could go in and the same environment and recount a documentary, if you will, where a discussion was going on, a debate format, and questions were going on in this forum about how would we determine how old Adam was, and no one considered, well, if Adam was a certain age, why would we want to know that? If not for the fact that we all as rational beings knew that the age of something did not correspond to the time of its existence, because no one asked, hey, is Adam 12 hours or 24 hours old since he was created on the sixth day? That was never the question. The question was he, you think he was 21 years old or 33 and a half, like a lot of people speculated, based upon Christ being the last Adam, the second Adam, and maybe that was an indicator of how we could project backward and try to understand. No one, and then they intrigued themselves by their interest in what the medical professional was saying about blood work and lab work and skeletal structure and development and how you could do an examination. But it was fascinating. Then why were we not able to just transfer that to the age of the earth and remember that there's a time of existence and then there is an age of something. So it's really interesting, especially when I went out there and launched my ship out on the World Wide Web and breached this topic. I've even watched people, have unhappy faces toward each other. No, I don't like him. I think he's a young earther. I don't like him because I think he's an old earther. But now, you never heard them say that. I did in all of my data gathering, which was methodical and systemic and deliberate and purposeful. Never heard anyone say, watch out for that guy. I think he's an old Adam and that guy's a young Adamer. He said, well, Brother Carr, that would be irrational to think of Adam in such a precise manner. We'd have to take a field of science such as the medical profession and take the field of science of chemistry, for example, and do blood work. Or maybe we'd have to take the field of science when it comes to evaluating blood work in the laboratorical, high precision, high technical, where whatever goes on there. No one's ever talked about that, but I was amazed that unbeknownst to even my audience, people were really interested. Well, I think Adam's this age, and no one was angry, and no one moved their chairs over to the other side of the room when they heard someone say they think he was 21, prime of age or mature adult. No one said no in harsh tones or emotional outrage. He had to be 33 or you don't believe the Bible. It was really fascinating. It's been a long journey. This is just one of the many topics that when we studied, we found that people were so inclined to war with words that they were even unaware of the words with which they warred. They may not always even have a definition of the word from the Bible, but the warfare blinded them, that heat, that passion, or I would rather say emotion, not passion. But this is interesting because when you everyone calms down, like good pastors are, we're always calm and patient, as the Bible tells us to be with people. I'm just reporting back that Adam existed a few hours, and people talk very calmly and with cogent expressions and deliberate thoughts, and even hear each other out. When they asked, was Adam 21 or 33, or how old do you really think he was, Brother Carter? But you don't really find that when it came to. But so the young or old earthism comes down to the same that we already understand in Adam and how old he was. So if you want to prove, let's say if you're debating Bill Nye, the science guy, which personally I don't find him to be very scientific. I'm not sure his field of study is that impressive, but that's not his fault. But if you ever wanted to say, well, if he thinks you're ridiculous for teaching 6,000, at least have the Bible gives us a rationale for how to express that. And then we can at least be consistent as Christians to say, well, now we know Adam only existed a few hours, but we've always been curious how old he was. And quite loving and kind to each other. When we talk about, I never saw anyone have any emotional outburst when we were talking about, how old Adam was, because we were all, as Christians, curious about the same thing. But I noticed we weren't at all as Christians curious about, how old is the earth since it only came into existence 6,000 years ago. So that's encouraging to know and sort this out. A little disappointing what I gathered from watching people. Some people pretend now, I can't speak to that guy because he thinks Adam's 21, and no, I can't speak to that guy because he thinks Adam's 33. But they do that with the age of the earth, and then people say things about each other, nasty, silly things, which is okay. What else do they have? But most of the banters, like Calvinism, Arminianism, we found the same thing. No definition of free will from the Bible was in either of the camps. No distinction between believe, punctual action, simplest form, and then the continuous action, or even the recognition of a gerundive noun that is a substantive participle. So those are large things. We found complex questions, things like monergism or synergism. Well, that was not what the Bible teaches. That's an artificial juxtaposition to create a complex question that prevents you from actually understanding what the Bible says, that God alone is the monergist, the worker, and that man alone is the one who believes. So believe is do, it's not a work according to the Bible. So all these things we sorted out and found that if Christians were as interested in the Bible and curious like we are about the age of Adam as opposed to how long he had existed for, I've never been in a class where someone, when asked, how old do y'all think Adam was when he was created? No one ever asked, well, we all know he's 12 hours old, and if you don't believe that, you don't believe the Bible. And someone else on the other side of the room jumped up and said, no, he's 24 hours old because a day is 24 hours. Well, never found it on the internet, all across the globe. We never found it. I never found it in a classroom here at Landmark Missionary Baptist Church. So what we learned here at Landmark is what I teach them openly, is that your interest in the Bible will be demonstrated in your interest in learning, collaborative reasoning, collective learning processes, evaluative methods, and true, genuine respect for one another as we learn together. The polarization, the either this or that, seem to betray the character of those who pick sides rather than posit scriptures and evaluate the text. So you have a blessed day, but that's really interesting to see how this has turned full circle. Have a blessed day.